My name is Marcus Cole, and I've spent the last 35 years of my life working for a company that, to the outside world, appeared to be a model of success and innovation. But if you'd asked anyone in the building, especially the higher-ups, they'd tell you I was just another faceless cog in the machine. A senior systems analyst, reliable but not flashy. I did my job, kept things running smoothly, and stayed out of the spotlight. The truth is, I wasn't always this way. When I first walked into that office at the age of 23, fresh out of college with a shiny degree in computer science, I had big dreams. I imagined myself climbing the corporate ladder, making a real impact, and eventually leading a team that would revolutionize the company. But reality has a way of dulling even the most ambitious dreams. I started out in the IT department, troubleshooting network issues and installing new systems. As the years passed, I became an expert in the company's infrastructure, an invisible hand that ensured everything operated without a hitch. Promotions came slowly. They always did for someone like me. After all, I wasn't a people person. I didn't play golf with the CEO or show up at every company party. My job was to be good at what I did and nothing more. By the time I hit 50, I realized that my career had plateaued. I had worked diligently for decades, yet when it came time for recognition, the rewards were few and far between. But I kept going. I had responsibilities, my mortgage, my kids in college, the steady need for income. I thought, maybe one day things would change. Maybe one day, my dedication would be acknowledged. And then came the email, the one that told me my retirement was finally coming up, the one that made me realize the truth. I had worked my entire life for a company that would toss me aside the moment I was no longer useful. Retirement day came faster than I expected. I had spent the last month wrapping up projects, preparing my successor, and trying to come to terms with the fact that I was walking away from a job that had been my entire life for so long. On paper, retirement was supposed to be a moment of celebration, a recognition of a career well spent. But in reality, it felt more like a quiet dismissal. The day before my last day, I was called into the president's office. Richard Weston, the man who had been running the company for the past 15 years, greeted me with his usual cold smile. He had always been a master of pretense, playing the role of the charismatic leader when cameras were rolling, but anyone who spent time with him knew that behind the polished exterior was someone who didn't care about much beyond his own success. "Marcus," he began, without looking up from his papers. "Tomorrow is your last day, and I just wanted to let you know that your departure isn't exactly something we're celebrating around here." I was used to his tactless remarks. Weston was always blunt, but there was something different about his tone that day, something colder. Maybe it was because I was leaving. Maybe it was because I was one of the last few from the original staff to go. "We've looked over your records," he continued. "And to be honest, I can't justify the bonus. You haven't exactly been the most proactive employee, have you?" I swallowed hard, trying to mask the frustration bubbling inside me. I had expected something like this, but it still stung. The countless hours of late nights, solving problems, and making sure the company's entire system didn't crash, all forgotten in favor of this man's narrow, short-sighted view. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, but I kept my composure. "I understand," I replied flatly, keeping my tone neutral. Weston's eyes gleamed with an almost predatory satisfaction. "I'm sure you do. I won't be spending a dime on a worthless employee like you. Your retirement package is already processed. Consider it a farewell." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as though his words were the final verdict. For a moment, I felt a surge of anger, at the injustice, at the way he had reduced my entire career to nothing more than a number on a spreadsheet. But I didn't show it. Instead, I simply nodded. "Got it," I said, a cold resolve settling over me. I stood up and walked out of his office without another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I had always believed in doing the right thing, in playing by the rules. But the truth was, I had given my best years to this company, and in return, they had given me nothing. The night before my retirement, I sat alone in my small apartment, the silence heavy around me. I hadn't felt this empty in years, like I was just waiting for something to happen. I could hear Weston's words echoing in my mind. Worthless employee. The phrase cut deeper than I cared to admit. I had spent decades helping this company grow, ensuring its systems ran smoothly, and now, after all that time, I was nothing more than a liability. As the hours passed, an idea began to form. one that started as a fleeting thought but soon consumed me entirely. What if I left with more than just my memories? What if, on my final day, I could show Weston and the others exactly who they had underestimated all these years? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had worked in the IT department long enough to understand the company's systems inside and out. I knew the vulnerabilities, the backdoors, the hidden codes. I had access to everything. And while I had always followed the rules, there was one thing my contract had made abundantly clear. Upon my departure, I had the right to delete my work and erase any trace of my contributions. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about being petty. It was about sending a message. I had given my time, my energy, my knowledge to this company, and in return, they had dismissed me like I was nothing. But they didn't realize that I had the power to leave my mark, not just in the systems, but in the company's very foundation. I spent the night preparing. I logged into my computer, making sure everything was ready for the next day. The tools I needed to access the company's core systems were all in place. I wasn't going to destroy everything, not at first. I wasn't going to burn the building to the ground. No, I was going to do something far more calculated. By morning, I was no longer angry. I was calm, too calm. I had made my decision, and now it was time to execute it. The day began like any other, with me walking through the familiar hallways, exchanging quiet pleasantries with the few people who remained in the office. I nodded at the few colleagues who had come to wish me well, but in the back of my mind, I was focused on the task ahead. Weston's snide comments, his dismissal of my years of hard work, they fueled me now. I wasn't going to let him, or anyone else, get away with it. At noon, I received a message from HR, something about a small farewell gathering in the break room. I almost laughed. A gathering. It was a formality, a token gesture to appear gracious when, in reality, they had no interest in me as a person. It was a chance for them to pat themselves on the back for sending me off with a handshake and a good luck. I ignored the invitation. My work, the one that mattered, was already in motion. I slipped into my office for the last time, locking the door behind me. The familiar hum of computers and the soft clack of keyboards filled the air, but I was in another world. I connected to the company network, bypassing the usual firewalls with ease. I had worked here too long not to know every shortcut, every loophole. I accessed the core systems, the ones that held all of the company's proprietary data, its confidential information, and, most importantly, its records of me. Then, with a few simple keystrokes, I began my work. First, I wiped the archives. Every email, every document, every project I had worked on over the years, gone. Next, I erased the backup files. I watched as the system slowly ground to a halt. Each click, each deletion, a small victory. The power was in my hands now, and I wasn't going to stop. The clock was ticking, and as I watched the minutes slip by, the weight of what I was doing began to settle in. I had reached the final step, the most dangerous part of my plan. I could hear voices in the hallway, the faint murmur of conversation as people went about their business, oblivious to the chaos I was unleashing. I was the last to leave for the day, the final cog in the machine. I could almost hear Weston's voice in my head. Worthless employee. He didn't know it yet, but I was about to prove how wrong he was. With one last deep breath, I accessed the system's core server, something that no one else in the company had dared to touch. This wasn't just about erasing files. No, this was about removing the foundation of the company's infrastructure, the very framework that kept everything running smoothly. The servers were the lifeblood of the company. If I could wipe them clean, it would cripple the entire operation. I paused for a moment, just before pressing the final button. I thought about everything I had sacrificed over the years. I thought about my family, my career, the years of hard work that had ultimately amounted to nothing more than a slap in the face. My contract gave me the right to do this. I had followed the rules, worked by the book, and now, I was going to leave a mark on this company that would last long after I was gone. In the deepest corners of my mind, I knew what I was doing would have consequences. People would lose their jobs, the company would suffer, and Weston would likely never fully understand why I did it. But in that moment, none of it mattered. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just cold, calculating, and ready to strike. With one final press of a key, I activated the command that would erase the server data. I watched as the system went dark, and then, as if in a delayed reaction, the entire network began to shut down. Slowly at first, and then faster. The files vanished, the records disappeared, and with each passing second, the company's heart stopped beating. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of calm sweeping over me. The system had been wiped clean. Weston's empire, built on my hard work, my loyalty, and my sweat, was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But just as quickly as the feeling of victory settled in, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my old friend, Doug, who had been with the company nearly as long as I had. "Hey, Marcus, you've got to see this. Weston's furious. His assistant just called me. The systems are down. He has no idea what's going on. No one does. What did you do?" I smiled to myself, leaning back in the chair again, savoring the moment. "Just making sure they remember my name," I typed back. Then I shut off my phone and stood up, straightening my tie as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The company would never be the same. I turned off the lights, packed up my things, and left my office for the last time. My resignation had been completed. My final act was done. As I walked through the corridors, the familiar faces of employees who didn't even know what was happening gave me no reason to pause. I could feel the weight of their ignorance, but I also knew they wouldn't understand. They weren't a part of the decisions that led to this. As I walked past Weston's office, I paused, looking through the glass. He was in there, shouting at someone, his face red with frustration. But that didn't matter anymore. It was too late for him, too late for the system, and too late for everyone who had ever underestimated me. The morning after my departure, I sat in the comfort of my own home, watching the sunrise filter through the blinds. The silence was peaceful, almost too quiet. I had expected to feel something, guilt, perhaps, regret, but all I felt was a profound sense of relief. It was over. I had finally taken control of my own story, no longer bound by the expectations or limitations that the company had placed on me for so long. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Doug. "Marcus, what the hell happened?" Doug's voice was thick with disbelief. "The entire system's down. Weston's blaming everyone, but he doesn't know who's behind it. The IT department is scrambling to fix things, but they're in chaos. You've really done it this time." I paused before responding. "It's not about them, Doug. It's about me. About what I deserve. You know how long I've been doing this job, how much I gave. And for what? A zero bonus? A pat on the back as I walk out the door? I couldn't let them just brush me aside without showing them who they were dealing with." Doug sighed. "I get it, but you've really turned the place upside down. No one's going to forget this. Weston won't either." I smiled faintly. "Good. I don't want him to forget." I set the phone down and thought about my next steps. The company would eventually recover. After all, it was a giant with deep pockets. But for a brief moment, I had made them feel vulnerable. I had proven that their systems, no matter how solid they appeared, were only as strong as the people behind them. People like me, who could be discarded without a second thought. But there was more to this than just getting back at them. My actions had opened my eyes to something I hadn't realized before. The company had defined me for years. It had set the terms for my success, for my worth, based on their arbitrary measures of performance and value. In the end, they had no control over me. I was the one who had built the systems that made their empire run. I was the one who knew its weaknesses. I had the power all along, but it took this final moment for me to see it. I could have walked away quietly, accepted my pitiful bonus, and retired with the same sense of resignation I'd felt for the last few years. But I chose something different. I chose to redefine what success meant for me. It wasn't about the bonus, the title, or the recognition from people who would forget my name as soon as I was gone. It was about owning my life, about making a stand, even if it was the last thing I ever did in that office. 2 weeks later, I received an email from Weston's assistant. The company had restored most of the systems, and they were offering me a substantial retirement package as a gesture of goodwill. But it didn't matter. I had made my point. The power of their position, their control over me, had shattered the moment I walked out that door. And so I moved on. I spent my time with family, took long walks in the park, and explored the hobbies I had abandoned over the years. I took up painting, something I had always wanted to do, and I found peace in it, peace that I hadn't felt in decades. Weston and the others? They never truly understood why I did it. They never knew the depth of my frustration or the years of pent-up resentment. But that was the point. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. I had spent too long being defined by someone else's version of success. But in the end, I realized that I had always been the one who held the power. I had simply waited for the right moment to use it.